Welcome to Bone, Stone, and Obsidian, a Dark Sun podcast.
I'm your host, Jesse.
And I'm Robert.
Today we're talking about wild weapons of the wastes.
We'll be going over the unique Dark Sun weapons from Dragon and Polyhedron magazine.
But before we jump into the magazine articles, let's talk about Dark Sun news.
Jarl Thor on Discord the other day, a couple weeks ago actually, just wanted to talk with people about Dark Sun, and so he was talking to me, and I was like, cool, let's make it happen. So I made him like an event organizer, and he just started doing these events. So it's every other Saturday, and then on the off weeks, it's every other Friday. And the every other Saturday ones are called what he's calling Dragon King Talk, where we're just talking about a topic. The first one was Dragon Kings, and then the second one was what was the second one?
Beyond the Tablelands.
I got to get those online. What's that?
Beyond the Tablelands.
Yeah, Beyond the Tablelands. Yep. And then on the off weekends, there are drinks at the Dirty Lizard or the Red Kank or at some cool Dark Sun tavern, and those are just sort of like open discussions.
Yeah, basically
so the Dragon King
pub crawl for people to socialize who are all Dark Sun fans.
Right. And it's been really cool just to talk to people and hear people's ideas and just everything. So those links will be in the notes, of course, as well.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity for you to hear some of the other voices in the community and just to make some connections with various fans. One thing notable about the body of the corpus of Dark Sun fans, if you will, is 5 years ago, the Dark Sun Facebook group had 3,000 members, and today it has 10,000. Now, I don't know how many of those are bots, but interest in Dark Sun seems to be growing alongside people who are interested in seeing the history of Dungeons and Dragons, and especially of other settings, since WotC has been publishing other settings here and there. So there's new people to meet, new ideas to explore, and potentially new people to recruit for games.
That's right.
Meanwhile, in Athos.org news, we've got the Lawful Stupid blog, repost number 3, Psionics, from our wonderful Logarium. Again, this is a repost from his series of blog articles. This one details alternative rules for 2nd edition Psionics in order to streamline the experience and customize it to some degree.
And we've got the Athasian Survey Project number 20, The Ruins of Calidne, written by Newjack. Always interesting.
The Athasian Survey Project, of course, goes all over Athos to write in-world descriptions of what various places are like. And Calidne on Athos is a desolate ruin, a wasteland of a failed sorcerer monarch. Calidne elsewhere might still be a thriving city-state with a slumbering dragon king. It's one of my personal faves because of the Ravenloft crossover and the many transformations that's gone through over the editions. Calidne has shown up in 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 5th edition. It's in many, many forms. And one of the neat things about that is that it has a bunch of mysteries associated with it that are never definitively answered. So it's really up to you to decide, what does Calidne mean in my campaign? It's a great drop-in if you want to give the players a sense of a sort of creepy horror vibe, or get that little dash of Cthulhu in your Conan for Dark Sun.
For sure. I really like how everybody's kind of doing it different. You know, like I kind of use it as a kind of Egyptian stand-in, and so, but other people do other things. And like in my Calidne, like there's just tons of undead there constantly, and there's like practically an undead society there, like living underground kind of thing. And It's just cool to hear everybody's idea. It's like in Eberron, where you have the Mournlands, right? And like, you know, it's just left to, they've never said anything like what really caused it. And so people just kind of fill in, you know, whatever they want, like whatever's there and whatever cause they want. So with Calidne, we know the cause, but there's not really a whole lot of details of what was there.
Right. And it's one of those things where we have some idea of what happened, but like, is the Sorcerer Monarch just asleep? Is the Sorcerer Monarch actually dead and has been substituted by the Dark Powers? Or if you're using Calidne still in Athos and you're just exploring in the ruins in the wastes, you could have remnants like your undead society that's living underground. And the reason for its disappearance could be anything you want. We know that high-level transformation magic sometimes requires people to go out to other planes. What if the Sorcerer Monarch of Calidne was trying to do some of the draconic transformation and accidentally just raptured everyone off to some other plane of existence? And you could have weird stuff going on where players find evidence of this happening, or even evidence that they might come back. Lots to do.
Yeah. So also, this totally reminded me. Gash Grunt on Discord made a poem that is being stated in Calidne for the crimes of the party, has done, and their return. I don't know what. Yeah, return after hearing the Dread Lord is coming. So it's a poem. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 7 stanzas. It's really good. I'll put a link to it. I really love it. I need to ask him if we can put it on the website, because it's interesting. We also just put out the Crimson Sphere random encounter tables. Adam Cieslak and Azog the Defiler put some Dark Sun Spelljammer crossover encounter tables for you.
Additional random encounter tables. There's a repost for the net project from Arco Jedi's compilation for Verdant Belts, and these include a lot of ideas that came from the old school Dark Sun mailing list. If you are old enough to remember that, like me, then if you take in your muscle relaxants today, the expanded random encounter table gives you interesting stuff beyond just, and here is another hungry monster that blasts your mind and then tries to eat you.
Yeah, we also posted the Sunstone, which was a minor artifact that you can use in your Dark Sun games. And then finally, another repost of the Lawful Stupid blog, this time with Dark Sun races. So if you want some additional second edition races, check it out.
Yes, good stuff. Moving on to actual plays. Several Dark Sun campaigns online still going strong. Blue Blocks RPGs, Sea of Dark Sun, still streaming on Twitch. We'll have a link for that in the show notes.
And Mysteries of Athos 2E, the 2E actual play. They were in Balik for a while. I'm not sure where they are now, but I think there's been 2 episodes since we recorded last.
Yeah, since our last podcast, they've dropped episodes 9 and 10. They're still in Balik, but things are continuing to develop for their hapless adventurers.
And then there is a new actual play, Rime of the Frost Maiden, for Dark Sun. These are folks that are taking, I think it's PhD&D's videos of turning Rime of the Frost Maiden into Dark Sun, and they're actually playing through it. So
yeah, this is wild.
On YouTube or Spotify.
Because Rime of the Frost Maiden starts with some strong survival elements, like how do you get from one town to another across the frozen wastes? So we'll just change it into like the flash frying wastes, and you still have the similar problem. Okay, there's 11 towns around a central basin of some sort, and you have to get from one to another in order to do various tasks and missions, but the environment is a major hazard until you get to around 3rd or 4th level and get all the stuff that you need to deal with it. I need to watch this. I'm very curious to see what they do for the end game, because in the original Rime of the Frost Maiden, spoilers, plug your ears, the goddess Auril has an avatar shows up. And obviously there's no gods in Dark Sun, so I don't know if they're using a corrupted spirit of the land or a sorcerer monarch or whatnot as a substitute, but I want to see where it goes.
Yeah, that should be interesting. All right, well, let's get into our main topic, Jesse.
Yeah, Dark Sun weapons, the wild weapons of the wastes.
So one of the cool things about Dark Sun is that we have non-standard weapons and we have non-standard materials. And Wayne and I talked about this way back in episode 11, which was in January of 2019. So if you want to hear us talking about that, you can go check that out. We mostly talked about, like, the first half of it was talking about the materials and like how we would do it for 5th edition, how we would do weapon breakage and stuff like that. And then the second half was just flying through all of the weapons because there's so many of them. Like, we didn't really, have time to get into them. And so that's what we're hoping to do today.
Yeah, I love to run long, and your last exploration was before the pandemic and before me. So now it's time to talk about weapons in detail. But for this one, we're just starting with the ones from the magazines, from Dragon 185 and Polyhedron 99. Um, Now, of course, why does Dark Sun have so many of these weird signature weapons? Well, a couple of reasons. You're going for the post-apocalyptic vibe. If you watch a lot of the cheesy post-apoc movies from the 80s, the stuff that comes out of Mad Max knockoffs and Italian filmmakers trying to make a quick buck, oftentimes characters are using unusual things that they just scavenged in order to beat somebody else over the head. And Dark Sun is right in on that vibe. Okay, I got a skull from some sort of bleached set of bones that I found in the wastes. I put it onto a stick as a lever and I hit people with it. So it's going for that vibe, the aesthetic of you are desperate for anything that you can use to defend yourself, and you pick up something weird and you figure out some way that you can insert it into someone else so that they stop trying to kill you.
It's good description.
And it goes hand in hand with the resource scarcity of there being no metal. So, if, excuse me, if you can't make your weapons out of iron or steel, what do you got left? You got bone, you got wood, you got stone. What sort of shapes do you make out of those things? What kinds of objects do you find naturally lying around that are going to be usable? What are things that you can do that work with this that maybe people don't consider a conventional weapon because it's not a sword or a spear? A great example of that's the Dejada, where you have a big scoop that you wear on your arm, which you can make out of like woven plant matter and leather, and then you use that to hurl spiked balls, and those could be made by putting chunks of spiky rock or obsidian into a polished sphere of wood, and you just fling it at someone at speed. Is this the kind of weapon that you are going to see in a conventional D&D game? Unlikely. But in Dark Sun, it's like you take what you can get. The other thing is, of course, Dark Sun's got gladiators and arenas, and people want a spectacle. And so there's going to be some weapons that are just going to be weird things that are made to put on a show. And you have a specialist who knows how to use a particularly unusual weapon in a strange way that's entertaining for the crowd. There's even a couple of weapons that are specifically listed in their descriptive text as, this weapon isn't very effective. It mostly scratches people a lot until they bleed to death. But arena people like that because it means that the combats last longer. You know, the arena watchers get a lengthy fight as it's taking forever for the gladiators to kill each other with their, angry house cats.
Yeah. So I know in the last episode where we talked about weapons, one of the links we had was to Jesse Heinig, some guy named Jesse Heinig's Steel Weapons article.
What? Who's that guy? Sounds sketchy.
So tell us about that article.
Very brief. Back when I was writing a whole bunch of little articles for Dark Sun before blogging was as mainstream as it is, I guess, now. And I just was trying to get across the notion of the role that steel weapons have in a Dark Sun game compared to other D&D games. That because Dark Sun characters can't use really heavy armor without having significant penalties, their armor class tends to be bad. So you have more hit points because you've got half giants, you've got higher constitution scores, but you need them because you're going to take a beating. Your AC is not going to be that good unless you're a Thri-kreen, with your natural AC 5 plus a dexterity of 17 or more. Hooray. The use of non-standard weapons means that even though you might have a character with a really high strength score and weapon specialization, a lot of those bonuses are offset by using weapons made of poor quality. And at low levels, you take what you can get. You are going to start with whatever equipment the DM allows you to start with, but many adventures start with the characters being in a position where they have nothing, and they just have to get whatever gear is at hand and use it. That's why the gladiator takes no non-weapon proficiency penalties, so that you can have that adventure. It's like you have all been captured by raiders, and you are sitting inside of a wagon tied up in leather thongs, badly bruised, and then the raiders get attacked by monsters or something, and now is your chance to make your escape. Oh, how do we fight our way out? The gladiator snaps the thongs, and then he grabs the latrine pot and starts braining people with it. So as your characters advance, you move from non-steel to steel to magical, and it's similar to the advancement of going to magic weapons in other D&D campaigns, but your weapons are going to lag behind. You get steel when other people would get +1 weapons. You get magic non-steel weapons around the same time that other people are getting +2 weapons. And you have to make some hard choices in that regard, because like a +1 bone sword is still a +1 weapon, but the +1 is being offset by the penalties for being bone, -1 if you're running second edition. So like it's better than a non-magic bone sword. Maybe it's more breakage resistant too, which is nice, but it's still not metal. And if you're running into a monster that can only be harmed by metal weapons, you're kind of in a bind. Um,
Yeah.
but the quest for steel is part of the low to mid level progression of Dark Sun characters, and it gives you a sense of real reward that it's like we have finally gotten our hands on metal weapons, and your characters get to show it off. If you are carrying a metal tipped spear or a metal sword or a metal anything in Dark Sun, people will notice it, and it means your character's a badass, and people are going to fear you, or they're going to try and steal it from you. You'll make some enemies if it's spotted, but presumably you have the skills to deal with them, which is how you got it in the first place.
Yeah, so that's a great article. Definitely check that out. And let's get into our main topic now. So
Yeah.
in 1992, there was Dragon Magazine number 185, and in that there is the Arena Masters Arsenal, as well as several other articles. And we were going to start doing a series of these podcasts that talk about the magazine articles, because I realized not too long ago that, a lot of people don't have access to them and can't get access to them. If you search real hard, you can, or not that hard, you can find them online, which is cool because they're not really available otherwise. You can't buy them because they were kind of from a time when nobody knew, or I guess now we don't know, who has copyright on what for everything, so they can't release them.
Right. So, these are the sorts of things that might take a little bit of digging, but they can really spice up your game by adding in these unusual, unconventional weapons that underscore the flavor of the game. One of the great things for DMs in Dark Sun as well is that since you get to decide the kinds of rewards that your players get from their encounters, you can have enemies that are using these weapons. You can have these show up in treasure hoards, and it's like, okay, I was hoping to use a magic spear, but I guess I'm going to be using Kahulax or a Crusher or a Gouge or something absurd because it's what you can get. And you can throw your players a curved ball. And who knows? Maybe they will make an identity for themselves out of, oh, yeah, I'm just going to lean into this weapon, get really good at it, and make this a signature part of my thing. So without further ado, on to the Arena Masters Arsenal. This article has almost a dozen weapons in it, and there's some great illustrations by Brahm.
Yeah.
Wow, we should edit that. Like, there's some great illustrations by Brahm. They're kind of sketchy, black and white line art, but really shows you exactly what these weapons are. So that's really nice too. And the first one is the Bard's Friend, which is basically kind of like a double-edged knife, and it has a set of holes for your fingers in the handle that then function like spiked knuckles. So this is designed to be something that you put all kinds of poison all over, hence the name the Bard's Friend. And it looks really gruesome, so the bards, of course, being flashy, and people who engage a lot in appearance can appreciate this sort of thing. And I guess before I get into the meat of this, I should mention that this article, like the Complete Gladiator, gives you special bonuses for using these weapons if you are a weapons specialist in it. This is an interesting choice because other standard weapons don't get this. Like if I'm a specialist in the longsword, I get +1 to hit and +2 to damage. I have a better attack rate, and that's it. Like any weapon specialist gets that. But these things have really unconventional bonuses that you get for being a specialist. And this is sort of a balance point. On the one hand, it's like, how come these guys get special treatment and these weapons give you some sort of special bonus that you can't otherwise get? But on the flip side, many of these weapons are less effective than using a mainstream thing. A Bard's Friend does like 1d4 +1 for its base damage compared to a longsword's D8. So being able to get some extra flavor out of it, some extra juice, makes it so it seems like more of a reasonable choice for a player to pick.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about these as well, because it has that proficient specialized use. So we've seen some of these other weapons, and players, even though you haven't seen this magazine, maybe you've seen these weapons because they were mostly put in the second the revised box set. There was a bunch of them put in there, but they didn't have Brahms art, of course, and they didn't have like the proficient use and specialized use. So I think this is also helpful. There's been some Unearthed Arcana for 5th edition stuff where they were talking about doing kind of like having weapon mastery and specialization, different abilities that you would get if you were specialized in a weapon, like something that you could do with it. So I would love to see these converted to 5th edition.
Yeah, yeah. So continuing on the Bard's Friend, interestingly, despite it being like really gruesome and having all these spikes and flanges and blades coming off of this monster of a dagger, the proficient bonus is that you can conceal it with a simple leather strap, and then you can draw it instantly at the beginning of a combat round without taking any damage. So basically, you can automatically hide this weapon on your person. Yet another reason for bards to love it. I guess since all of the blades on it are along one plane, you could lie it flat against your body and then tie it up with a thong or something like that. And if you're a specialist, it's wild. You can use it as a parrying weapon, which means that if you use it to parry instead of to attack, you get a 3-point bonus to your armor class. This is huge for characters who are wearing crappy armor or none at all. And you get to fight in a two-weapon style with no penalties if you're a specialist in this, which is bonkers. You normally would have to specialize into two-weapon fighting in order to do that. But now, if you're a weapon specialist with the Bard's Friend, you can use this and another weapon at the same time. You can attack with the main weapon and then get your offhand attack with the Bard's Friend, or attack with the main weapon and then parry with the Bard's Friend for a +3 to AC. This is an enormous dueling weapon. And of course, if you're a bard, you have poison all over this thing. It's a beast. Yeah. So now, if you're a bard, you're not a specialist, but a gladiator using this in conjunction with some other specialized weapon, an impaler or something like that, get the huge bonus to AC from parrying with your Bard's Friend and then murder someone with the impaler in your other hand. And of course, I can see bards all over the place just dual wielding Bard's Friends. You use 2 of them, put poison on both of them, parry if you need to, or double attack if you don't.
Yeah, and I just love that image of that Brahms image. And I would say this is probably, maybe because I just love it so much, it's in so many of my games. Like it comes up pretty constantly.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
All right, the next one are the Kahulaks. They are basically, a pair of 4-bladed weapons that are kind of held together with a length of rope. They are what you see in one of the Brahm images of Rikus. He's holding a pair of these.
Right, he's facing the viewer with his head slightly turned to one side, showing off his glorious oiled musculature, and he's holding the Kahulaks in either hand with the rope connecting them. As a weapon for 2nd edition, the Kahulaks is mid-tier, D6 damage, speed factor 5, 12 pounds, so pretty heavy. And they're typically made out of bone, it says in the description. But when you are proficient with them, you can use the Kahulaks in either hand to fight with 2 weapons, even though they're technically the same size. So this is, again, another one of those 2-weapon fighting benefits that you normally would have to throw a bunch of proficiencies into. You can throw them, and it rolls for each one to attack. This is an interesting strategy because, like, the throwing range is presumably very short, and it only does half damage when you throw it. D3 for each head. You roll twice to attack. But say you want to disrupt a spellcaster. Throwing your Kahulaks, if you can't reach them, might be a good way to get 2 attack rolls instead of 1 in order to really guarantee that you're going to stick some damage on them and stop their spell casting. Plus, it can tangle people up, which then prevents them from attacking or moving for 1 round. That could be a huge game changer. When you're specialized, you can grapple people by hurling one end of the kahulak while you're holding the other one. It's sort of like a Manriki Gusari if you study Japanese weapons. Again, half damage, and then you grapple the opponent, and you can pull them off balance or trip them using it almost like a harpoon grappling hook sort of thing. All of these grapple attacks run off of saves versus paralysis, which is sort of the unspoken rule of 2nd edition about if you're trying to grab someone or knock them off balance, they resist with saves versus paralysis. So it becomes less effective at higher levels as critters get more better saving throws. But still, this is a handy weapon for your gladiator to be able to control the battlefields, interrupt people, tie them up, keep them busy for a round as you throw this thing at them so that you can take the time necessary to get into your position, run away, or charge them next round with your impaler or whatever else you have at hand.
Yeah, I feel like these are pretty iconic as well. They show up in a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
The next one is the Crusher, which is sort of a ridiculous one, really.
This weapon is absurd.
It is a spiked stone ball or metal ball, if you're lucky, on a 20 to 25 foot flexible pole. And the idea is that the wielder plants one end of the pole in the ground and then kind of whips the head back and forth. Hopefully there's nobody behind you, like your own troops or something. So I guess this is more like maybe a gladiator item who's kind of, got to fend everybody off.
Yeah, it's really expensive. It's heavy. It's large size, so you got to use 2 hands to use it. It's very slow, and the damage is incredibly tiny. D4 damage, D3 versus large size creatures. So it is a bizarre weapon.
Yeah.
It reminds me of like looking at the frond of a yucca plant, one of those giant 12-foot tall fronds, and then you get it while it's springy and bendy, and then you just add a big rock to the end and you start whipping it back and forth until you accidentally hit your brother in your face, and then your mom screams at you, and you have to go to the urgent care. So the Crusher is one of those things that's like, okay, I could see this being in a weird arena scenario, or maybe it's used in a battlefield formation where you get a bunch of guys that set up Crushers in a line, and if you don't have pikes, this is like a way to just area deny an area, because nobody can come in there without getting beaten to crap with all the Crushers flailing around the spot.
It also mentions that while it's difficult to use in individual combat, it says Crushers can be employed behind a line of friendly troops to disrupt the enemy. So I guess, like sort of as a reaches over your friendly troops.
Right. And then the once you're proficient with the Crusher, you get to pick a danger space. So you pick a circle ahead of you and behind you, and anyone that enters that area gets attacked multiple times. So basically you start this thing whipping back and forth, and then it just keeps beating on these areas, and anyone who goes in there suffers multiple attacks from it. So like I said, area denial. And then if you're a specialist, you can change the danger zone so that it's enormous. It becomes a 10-foot radius area, and then a small circle outside of that. And you can pick multiple targets to hit. So this is the sort of thing where you plant a whole bunch of these in a row when the enemy is driving a bunch of their levy troops that have no armor and wooden clubs toward you, and you just generate a huge danger zone of Crushers, and anyone who gets into there gets mulched. Definitely not the sort of thing that you take into a dungeon.
Yeah, not gonna fit.
Right.
But I mean, it only does D4, but like you said, it's six attacks with just the proficient use. So that's pretty good. 6d4.
Yeah. If you hit with all of them.
Yeah.
Next up, the Adducci Club. This is like, it should be more famous, I feel. It's just an enormous spiked club, kind of like a Tetsubo, but it doesn't have the metal bands most of the time because it's Dark Sun. But this is exactly the sort of thing that you expect to see, like a half giant using this in two hands and just swinging it around with a 6 foot long haft and then an extra 8 feet of club and just mashing people, turning them into small spots on the ground. Weirdly, given its like size, it doesn't do that much damage. D6, D4, but
Yeah.
it's surprisingly fast. Speed factor of 4,
Mm.
probably because the standard Dachi club, according to the text, is made out of a porous material like insect hive or dried roots, which makes it really light. So you can whip it around surprisingly fast, but it doesn't have the mass to hit really hard. Still, if you are swinging an 1800 strength or higher, you're getting a bunch of damage bonus on that, and it's still going to hit people really hard. It is large size, so you're still using it in two hands.
Yeah, so proficient use is exactly what you just said. It doesn't really give you any bonuses because the speed is essentially its bonus.
Right. But once you're a specialist, you can spin the weapon while you are hitting it, and it does bonus damage because you are tearing into people with the spikes that are all along the edge of the club. So imagine you've got this giant club, and then you're basically doing a wrist spin with your grip so that the thing is spinning like a power drill, and then as you swing it, it's spinning. You got it kind of loose in your hands because it's light enough that you don't have to worry about the momentum, and you clobber someone, and not only is the club knocking them off their feet, but all of the spikes on it are tearing through them like a saw.
Yeah.
And you have a limited amount of time that you're allowed to do so each day, but it gives you a small amount of bonus damage, D3 extra damage on your hits. So it turns into, against medium creatures, D6 plus D3, 2 to 9 range. You're a specialist if you're doing this, so that's another +2, and then potentially a strength bonus, and it's very fast, so potentially pretty fearsome.
Um, and obviously, if your group is not playing with speed factor, then I wonder how you could give this, give the wielder some bonus.
Yeah, that's true. Speed factor is one of the balance points for a lot of these weapons, and if your group is not playing with that, then I wonder how you're doing initiative, obviously, because normally second edition it's D10 plus your speed factor if you attack the weapon, +3 if you're medium size and moving or taking some other action, +0 if you're using psionics, plus casting time if you're using a spell. Uh, but if you're doing your turn resolution in some other way, you might just give the Dachi club some sort of benefit. Like if you're playing old school style where they go missiles and magic go off first and then melee attacks with like charges first and then by weapon length, you might treat the Dachi club like one stage earlier. Just the Dachi club swings faster than other melee combatants.
Yeah, so moving on to the Dragon's Paw. This is a cool weapon as well.
Yeah.
It's basically like a spear, like a double spear, but then there's also one in the middle, kind of at a right angle.
Well, okay, we know what this really is. Okay, it's a pole extending to either side, and you got sharpened bits on each end, and then there's a guard across the center that has blades coming out of it. It's a batleth, um, straight out of TNG. Um, this is said to be popular with the arena masters in Uruk and Tyr. Technically, kind of a double-ended spear or pole arm with a basket hilt in the middle. Um, Weapon damage is mid, D6, D6 plus 1, kind of slow at a speed factor of 8. Also a large weapon. A lot of these weapons are large, so you have to use two hands with them, which is kind of a bummer if you were counting on using a shield to get that bump to your armor class. But, if you can kill the other guy first, it doesn't matter what your AC is. Um, so when you're proficient with this thing, you get the ability to use the center shaft for more leverage, which means that you can make a dex check to do bonus damage, an extra d4 damage on your attack. So once again, we're seeing like the spinning Dachi club. Okay, you can take that mid damage of d6 and turn it into d6 plus d4. Now you're running 2 to 10, and that's without even being a specialist in it. So this is potentially a decent weapon for characters who are allowed proficiency in non-standard weapons like a thief or a bard. If you are not going to be using a shield anyway because you're a thief, So you've got both hands to use on a weapon. Well, if you're proficient with this thing and you make a dexterity check on your attack roll, and the thief is going to have a good dexterity, you can suddenly turn this into a 2 to 10 damage weapon, or 2 to 10 plus 1 against large size. So that's kind of nice. If you're a specialist warrior, you can use the outer blades for defense. So when you do this, you get basically a bonus attack with your edge blade that does an extra 1 to 2 points of damage from the smaller outer blade. So you're already a weapon specialist, getting 3-2 attacks or 2 attacks per round, but now you get a bonus attack, and it only does D2 damage. But specialization counts. There's a +2. Strength counts. That might be more. So gives you that higher attack rate if you're a warrior. But it's really, like you said, an iconic weapon. It has very much a Dark Sun gladiatorial appearance. And if your character is not using a shield, this is an interesting one that can give you a surprisingly high damage output if you have a decent dexterity.
Yeah, so, in that weapon specialization, it says you can use it to ward off opponents, but then the sort of specialized ability is extra damage. So I really thought, as I was reading that again, I was like, oh, is this AC?
Yeah, that feels like something that got a note during design and was changed at the last second.
So I just had a funny story about the Dragon's Paw in my last Dark Sun game.
Yeah.
So the mule gladiator, his name is Shook. He is wielding one, and they were fighting, and he rolled a 1, and then broke the weapon. So the way I do it is you roll a 1, you got to roll again, and if you get lower than a 10, then the weapon breaks. So that happened. So he broke the weapon. He continues fighting. Like a round or two later, he swings again, and he rolls a 1, and then he rolls again, and he rolls a 1 again. So like the weapon just shattered. So both ends of his weapon are shattered. I was like, well, you're lucky it has 3 blades. He's like,
right?
Yeah. So it was pretty funny.
That is fairly hilarious. It brings to mind all those like Daffy Duck cartoons where he's fighting with a stick or whatever, and it's getting chopped up by the guy with the sword.
Totally.
Just, chunk, there goes one end, chunk, there goes the other end, and all I've got left is a little stub that's got a pointy bit on it.
Nice. All right. Another weapon that I love and I've used before, the gouge is the next one. This is like a funny weapon, but it's also cool. So it's essentially like you're wearing a strap that is holding a shovel. If the shovel was sharpened and had a blade, and then there was something sticking out of the side of the shovel so that you could, grab it with your other hand. So you could use 2 hands to swing this thing kind of on the strap and stab someone with it.
Yeah, so basically turning the shovel into sort of a piercing, almost pole arm, because you've got a side handle to change your grip so that instead of it being the thrusting action like a spear, the action is more like you're holding a gardening tool of some sort that you've sharpened the end. And this weapon is one of those hidden powerhouses. It's very heavy and slow, 2-handed, but D8 or D10 damage, depending on whether you're fighting medium or large critters. So its base damage is already pretty solid. And you get into the bonuses, and so if you've got the proficiency with it, after the first round, you can gouge someone and get +2 on your damage if you beat them on initiative, which with the low speed factor of 8 is maybe dicey. And if you fail to win the initiative, you take a -4 penalty on your attack roll because you're trying to maneuver the gouge into the right position. So it's a bit of a gambit there. If your character is already fast from having a high dexterity bonus or having the style specialization in 2-handed weapon fighting, which reduces the speed factor by 3, then you can set up your gouge and turn it into a D8 +2 just by being proficient. And when you get up to specialization, you can do what they describe as a full body spin. So I guess you do your dance move and then launch the gouge into the guy with the extra momentum from the spin. You take a -2 on the attack and do double damage. And there's a note at the beginning of this article that anytime you see something that says double damage, you put in all of your bonuses to your roll and then double it. So D8 +2 for specialist plus strength doubled. So the gouge is, if you hit with that, because it causes a -2 penalty, you're just going to be mowing through people. You are using it like a shovel against light troops. Just gawk, toss, gawk, toss.
And stepping back to the proficient use real quick, I was just reading it and I was like, well, why would someone attack somebody if they came later in the round and then they wouldn't get the bonus? And I remembered that in second edition, you usually kind of like said what you were going to do first, then you rolled your initiative.
Right.
So even though you wanted to attack someone, you could end up going after them.
Right, right. Earlier AD&D editions had you declare your intention first, then everyone figures out what the turn order is, and then the DM sorts out where everything goes in the combat round.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to the Master's Whip. Basically, you take a normal whip and you add a spiky ball on the end. So it's almost kind of like a flail if you squint
Yeah, but
hard
it's
enough.
not. But you're not kind of like smacking them with. You're not supposed to like. It's not like a flail because each of those little spikes is really hollow, and you put poison in them. So you
Right,
just kind of like want to nick somebody with it.
right. And although the name implies obviously that it's used for disciplining people, and obviously you don't want to poison and kill the people that you're disciplining, so it's in this weird niche between being some sort of utility tool and also being a weapon that you can put poisons into to be really brutal. Um, Low damage output, D3, D2, because it's still just a whip with a small spiky weighted bit at the end. But you get to use the poisons once you are proficient with it. So this is an unusual little departure, I think, in that a lot of poison use in Dark Sun is sort of predicated on you're a bard, therefore you know how to use this poison. But as soon as you're proficient with this weapon, you can use poison in it specifically. And you can use various sorts of contact poisons and insinuative poisons. So presumably you're buying those from your bard buddy. Um, And one of the things that they do that's odd about it is it has multiple barbs, and each one you can load with a different poison, but you roll randomly to see what poison hits. But if you're a specialist, you choose which barb you hit with. So one of the advantages to this, despite being slow and having a low damage output, it is one-handed, so you could use a shield or a weapon in your offhand. But it's inconspicuous. Like, as a disciplinary tool, it is not the sort of thing that you would consider like out of the ordinary for someone to be carrying if they're just wandering around a city-state or traveling from here to there with a group. Overseers and Templars might be expected to have these for disciplinary uses. So even though it is a subpar weapon in terms of pure game stats, it can have some benefits in terms of not drawing attention to your characters just for carrying one of these around. And then when you use the poison, you can do some real damage with that if you manage to hit with it.
All right, moving on. The next weapon is the Tortoise Blades. Another favorite. That image is just so amazing. It's a guy with some kind of spiky helmet, and he kind of looks like human, but also maybe something else. And then he's got these tortoise blades on, and the shield part of the tortoise blade looks like a monster face, which is cool. And so basically what these are is, a shield on your forearm, on the back of your forearm, and then a blade sticking out in front of you.
Right. I love tortoise blades. One of the pre-gen characters in the Sand Marches is a dual tortoise blade wielder.
Nice.
So you've got these sand tortoises, shells, or something that is artistically designed to emulate that shape, about the size of a buckler or small shield with a short, stubby blade protruding from it, maybe somewhere between dagger and short sword size. Decent damage output, D6 plus 1, speed factor 5, so they're relatively quick. And at 5 pounds, they're not going to break the bank encumbrance-wise. So once you strap on your tortoise blade, you immediately get a 1-point armor class bonus from it because it's treated like a shield. And you can double that up. If you have 2 tortoise blades, you get 2 points of armor class from it, 1 for each hand. If you're proficient with it, you can also choose to parry. There are parrying rules in the player's handbook. When you use the parrying rules, you get an extra point of armor class for each tortoise blade that you're wearing. So if you are, for instance, their example is a 6th level warrior, gets a 4-point bonus to parry when they use the parry action, and then plus 2 more by using a pair of tortoise blades. Um, so you can get like an enormous amount of defense out of these, and this can be really cool if you're doing something like having your fighter or your gladiator using tortoise blades to try and hold a line so that the thief can get into backstab position, for instance. And you just go full tank, and you're like, I'm just going to parry, and good luck trying to hit me. My crappy AC from leather armor, suddenly I'm getting the parry bonus, and I get the extra tortoise blade bonus, and my armor class is just going down, 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 because lower is better.
Yeah, looking at that, it said a warrior with one on each arm and no other armor would have AC 8. So if you take that and then you add that pairing on top of that, that's pretty amazing.
Right, because the AC bonus for the tortoise blades themselves, being shields, 1 point each, then gets an additional point from the tortoise blade bonus when parrying. So in their example, they have an unarmored warrior who's level 6. He parries. So he gets 4 points from parrying. That brings him from AC 10 unarmored to AC 6. He gets 2 for wearing the tortoise blades. That takes him from AC 6 to AC 4. He gets 2 more because he's parrying while using 2 tortoise blades, which is another 1 point for each one. He's AC 2 while unarmored and just wearing a pair of these tortoise blades. That is the same as the aforementioned Thri-Kreen with a dexterity of 17.
Right.
So the trick, of course, is you're not doing anything else while you're parrying. That's your only action. So that's why I say this is a great thing if your character is going to like switch off between tanking and fighting. If you do decide to fight with them, of course, you're running D6 or D6 plus 1 damage. Okay, it's short sword damage, piercing or slashing type. So if it matters for the type of critter you're fighting, they have some versatility. Whereas like the short sword is just piercing only. If you've got a decent strength score, you're going to do okay. And then you get into specialization, plus 2 bonus to damage on top of that. A specialized wielder can use them without speccing into 2-weapon fighting. No penalties for 2-weapon fighting with them. Or rather, no penalty with the first tortoise blade, minus 2 with the second. So it's basically like you have partial 2-weapon proficiency with them. You know what really excels with the tortoise blade? The ranger, because the ranger already is a 2-weapon fighter, and so you take the ranger with the tortoise blades. You're not a specialist because you're not a single classed fighter, so you don't get that 2-weapon bonus, but you already have the 2-weapon bonus from your class. So now you're wearing maybe studded leather armor, because the ranger uses that when they use their stealth skills and whatnot. That's AC 7. You get 2 points of AC from having the tortoise blades, so that's AC 5. If you decide to parry, your AC is going to go through the floor. It's going to be amazing. But when you fight, you're swinging them for D6 plus strength damage, and you get 2 attacks around with no penalties because you get to use your ranger 2-weapon fighting.
Wow.
Yeah.
So moving on to the weighted pike. This is one that I don't think I've ever seen used in one of my games. Not for really any reason. I don't know. It just never really grabbed me. How about you?
Yeah, this is one of those ones that's sort of like, I don't get it. Like, I guess it artistically it fits sort of like the, oh yeah, I could see this in the armies of Barsoom sort of vibe. You know, you got a pointy end on one bit and then you got a heavy ball on the other end so that you have a back half to swing if you want. Aesthetically interesting, functionally makes no sense. Like if you're using a spear or a pike, you want that weapon to be really light so that you can thrust it fast. You can move it into position and thrust it fast and shove it through your opponent. And if you've got a heavy ball waiting down the back end, that's going to slow it down and it's going to make you get tired while you're holding the weapon.
Hopefully
so
you don't hit yourself.
it doesn't seem very practical, but practicality isn't really the order of the day for Dark Sun weapons. So we'll let it ride. So, weighted pike, really slow. Speed factor 12. You are going last. Large size. You must use it in both hands. Damage output is a little bit weird. It has D6 or D12 or D4, depending on what you're hitting and what end you're hitting it with. So it's 7 to 8 feet long. It's got a pike blade on one end. It's got the weighted spiked ball on the other end, which is, they mentioned, often made of ceramic baked right onto the haft that you use almost like a mace. Um, if you are proficient, you can freely switch between mace and pike striking with every attack, even if you have multiple attacks in a single round. Assuming you can reposition yourself, because the pike end is made for long distance attacks and the mace end is made for short attacks. So this is like if you have multiple attacks, and if you're in a formation where there are multiple people attacking you at different ranges, then you can pike end one guy at a range and club one guy close up. Very specialized sort of use. I probably shouldn't have said specialized because that means something different in this context. But very very niche. But okay, let's roll with it. Once you get to the specialized benefit, you can basically choke down on the mace end, and then this is where it gets wild. You basically swing it like a baseball bat, and it does 3d6 damage. So all of a sudden, it's like, oh, very effective when used by a specialized wielder in a very specific context.
Yeah, it's like a
But
7 foot long baseball bat.
yeah, so kabam! And that is a ton of damage. But yeah, I have never seen anyone actually take this weapon. Um, but someone might if I used it against them by a specialist who hit them for that 3d6 and they survived.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I need that. All right, moving on to the Widow's Knife, and this is a cool weapon. I always liked it. It looks super cool. Of course, it's Brahm.
Yeah.
It just seems a little bit, I don't know, just not that useful of a weapon. Like just visually, it's basically like a dagger, but if your dagger had a wide blade, like an axe.
Yeah,
Uh,
the blade is essentially an arc, almost 180-degree arc that's completely sharpened, um, so that you can slash with it instead of stabbing. And then the back end of the haft has a pair of prongs in it, possibly spring-loaded, so you can stab with the prongs, maybe with poison on top of them. I actually really like the Widow's Knife, both because it's aesthetically distinct and because the name implies that it's like this is the sort of weapon that is a small weapon used for self-defense by desperate people. And so it is a humble weapon with some surprises. It's doing D4 damage, so it's got dagger damage, piercing and slashing. Speed factor 3, very fast. And you can throw them with dagger ranges. Rate of fire 2, so you can throw 2 of them around. Suddenly I see people like wearing bandoliers covered in these things and just flinging these arcs out at people. The They even talk about the fiction a little bit in the article, saying that it takes its name from a harvesting tool used in verdant belts by women who've lost their husbands and must work for themselves. Um, and it's also a favorite court weapon and arena specialty, and I can get that because it's got a very distinctive appearance. It's inexpensive. It doesn't do a lot of damage, so you get those lengthy arena fights that we were talking about, but its use would be very flashy by someone who's skilled with it, because you can strike with both ends, you got surprise attacks at the prongs, and the slashing blades are going to lend themselves to a lot of wide arcing action as opposed to stabbing dagger combat, which tends to be like slash, slash, and then you get in on someone and stab, 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 stab in their abdomen 8 times. When you're proficient with it, you get to use the spring-loaded prongs more effectively. So you can attack with and release the prongs when you hit to get a bonus D3 damage. So you go from 1 to 4 up to 2 to 7 when you hit with that. You have to then launch the prongs before you make the attack roll. So even if you miss, ka-chunk, you have released the prongs. Now, this is like the old Battlestar Galactica toys in the 70s. They don't actually launch out. They just chink, they spring out and are still attached to the weapon. But getting that extra chink spring attack lets you get that bonus damage once. So if your opponent has seen a Widow's Knife before, they probably know it's coming, but it's still going to hurt, especially if you have put poison on them. The weapon specialist gets bonuses when throwing them, so you double the range, and you get a +4 bonus on your attack rolls when you're throwing Widow's Knives, regardless of what range you're throwing it at. So this is bonkers. The aforementioned character who's got a bandolier festooned with these things, why would you not? You're throwing at least 2 per round, more if you're a high-level specialist, +4 on your attack roll, double the normal throwing range, and you're going to catch people by surprise. And if someone gets up into melee range with you, ka-chink, you use that spring-loaded and do a hit for 2 to 7 plus specialization plus strength. pretty wacky. So it's like it's not a primary weapon for a fighter, but this is a great surprise weapon for a gladiator to use, and it's really thematically appropriate for all sorts of rogues, thieves, and bards. I might even be inclined to allow wizards to learn how to use this weapon because it's very similar to a dagger in many ways.
Yeah, I agree. Uh, Looking at the Bard's Run reminded me that I just recently saw another cool picture of it. So Matt
Yeah.
Hilker, he does a lot of amazing Dark Sun art and just dark art in general, character art uh, on Twitter. He might be on Instagram, but I will share the image. And he has an image of a mule with a widow's knife and a dragon's paw. So it is
Nice.
it's just a great image. I have so many of his.
There was another
images.
one
Great Dark Sun.
that I also saw come through the Discord, and this was several months ago, so alas, I don't have it at hand. But it was an image of a bard in a court scenario coming down steps with a widow's knife in hand, but her widow's knife was designed to look like a papyrus stalk because it's got that same sort of wedge-shaped arc, almost 180 degrees at the top, and then it had lines across it that were hinting at papyrus. Very Egyptian sort of theme. It was just a really cool piece of art.
Yeah, I don't recognize that. I'll have to check it out.
Well, I think that's it for Dragon. So we got to move on to Polyhedron before we run out of time.
Yeah, I think we're out of time, but let's keep going. All right, so
why not?
Now we are going to Polyhedron 99. So this one's a little bit harder to find online, but you can still find it.
Yeah. And the Arena Masters Arsenal gives way now to the new weapons for Dark Sun. This article came out in, was it 94, I want to say? I'm going from memory here.
Something like that, yeah.
It came out after the complete Gladiator, and
1994.
that is mentioned in the article. Some of these things are modifications of weapons from complete Gladiator, and everything in this listing is assumed to be made out of steel. So that handles the whole like, okay, how much is the cost supposed to be in the weight? Is it assumed to be made of bone? Is it assumed to be what? No, it says up front. Everything that's listed here assumed to be made out of steel. If it says that it costs you 21 gold pieces for this thing, it costs you 21 gold pieces, which is 2,100 ceramic pieces. So you're paying a ton of money for the steel version of it. If you want bone, get it at your nice reduced rate.
So this series of weapons, obviously was, looking at the complete Gladiator's Handbook and looking at the weapons we just talked about, because a lot of them are very derivative.
Yeah. Basically taking many of these existing weapons and putting a bit of a twist on them. So the first one in that lineup is the Chain Whip, which has that 21 gold piece value if you buy it in steel. So that's expensive for something that does D3 damage versus smaller, medium, and D2 versus large. Medium size, so you're only using one hand. 7-foot length of very fine chain. Considered a favored gladiator weapon. Like if you are stuck using it non-proficient, it is really, really suboptimal. If you're proficient, you can use it to try and entangle an opponent to make them unable to defend, which has no game mechanics listed. Oops. And then specialized use lets you lash out and entangle with a single limb. You know what? I'm going to take a quick look at the Gladiator's Handbook and see if this is referencing rules that are in the complete Gladiator, but not actually reprinting them. Because it feels to me like it's doing that. Because otherwise it's like, hey, we're going to give you a little descriptive thing about its ability and not tell you how it actually works. That would be terrible.
I looked for entangle and I didn't see anything.
Here we go. Gladiators Handbook. New weapons. Okay. There's no chain listed in the complete Gladiator. So this is something of a disappointment because what does this actually do? No idea. It has no mechanics given for this idea of entangling someone to mess up their defenses or to snare a specific limb. if I had to make a ruling on the spot, I would say that you can attack to entangle someone if you're proficient, and if they fail their save versus paralyzation, that aforementioned, you know, standard resistance against grabbing and grappling, then you give them an armor class penalty as long as you maintain your hold. And then if you're specialized, you can entangle a single limb, and when you do that, they cannot use that limb to attack or spellcast or whatnot as long as you maintain the hold. Or if you grab a foot, you can yank someone prone. But yeah, no mechanics given. Wah, wah. Well, can't win them all.
All right, the next one is the Dejada Cestus, and this is a reinforced version of the normal Dejada made with heavier bones to stand up to the impact of blows of melee combat. So the Dejada was what Jesse was talking about earlier. That's kind of like a basket, but now you can hit someone with it too.
So yeah, the Dejada is basically the Jai-Alai scoop as seen in Tron back in 1982. It's a not very famous sport in the real world where you have the big scoop attached to your arm as sort of a gauntlet that you put on, and then the scoop comes out in a crescent shape, and you put a ball into that, and then you use that to hurl balls at your opponent, who has to catch them with their own scoop and hurl them back. In Dark Sun, it's a weapon that you use to fling spiky balls at your opponent's head at high speed. So the Dejada Cestus is just taking the Dejada and saying, okay, what if we armored this up and put spikes on it, so if someone gets close to you, you punch them with it instead of flinging the ball at them at long range. And you can still use it to hurl the Dejada balls. D6 damage for the Cestus, D8 or D6 for the ball. When you are proficient, you get to throw one pelota, one ball, each round with the strength bonus for brute force. And then when you are a specialist, you can use a save versus petrification to catch the balls. So this is really specialized arena weapon of, just like in that scene in Tron, you get two guys who each are specialists with the Dejada. You give them these weapons, and then you set them on opposite sides of the arena, and you make them fling the pelota at each other and try to kill each other with them. And the specialists are catching the pelota out of the air and then slinging them back and whatnot. In like your typical adventurer context, maybe a little less useful. The nice advantage of the Dejada Cestus specifically is you fling pelota at people until they close to melee, and then you punch the crap out of them with it. But the range on it is really short. So, and it only has a rate of fire of 1. Like, I'd rather throw specialized Widow's Knives.
Yeah. All right, next up one. No, go for it.
Go ahead.
The next one is the Gladiator's. The next one is the Gladiator's foot. The Gladiator's friend, Footman, which says that, is there a horseman somewhere?
No. Why would there be? Because there's no horses.
But later we have the whistling mace's footman. Then we have whistling mace horseman.
They can't all be winners. We're on the island of misfit weapons here.
So this is a short polearm that's about 6 feet long. It's designed to give gladiators an appropriate type of weapon no matter what they need. So it's got bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing for whenever they need it. And so the one end has a large spike that inflicts damage as a spear. The other is a large head that's kind of like a footman's mace, and it's topped by a falchion blade as a halberd's axe head. Where is that? Oh, I see. It was the other way.
Topped by a falchion blade as a halberd's axe head is topped by a spike. So basically, you've got a pole. On one end, you've got a pointy bit like a spear. On the other end, the pole widens in a ball so that you have a mace head, and then the very top of that mace head, you've got a crescent blade, again like the widow's knife, that you can use to slash or maybe even stab with the end of the crescent. Essentially, it's an unholy mashup of 3 different weapons into a very ineffective tool. Combo!
Yeah.
Damage output is Okay, if you use the blade or the spike, you're doing d6 or d8. If you're using the mace head, you're doing d6 plus 1 or d6, just like a footman's mace. No surprises. Large size, so you got to use 2 hands. Speed factor 8. The main advantage is that you can get any type of damage out of it: bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing. Um, this is like a weird hybrid weapon that is the sort of thing of like, oh, we're doing the prison break, or we're, just got out of being held captive by raiders or whatever, and what can I grab? All right, there's a weapon rack that's empty except for a pair of gladiators friends, and you're like, all right, whatever, I'll take it. And it doesn't even give you any special bonuses for being proficient because it is trying to fill so many roles. It's too complicated. The specialist advantage is that you can flip the weapon around and attack with multiple ends in a single round, and you can use it to parry, like a quarter staff, because it's got a haft. So the first part that you can switch it around, that implies that, like, if you have multiple attacks, you have to pick a version, the piercing, the slashing, or the bludgeoning, and that's what you're doing all around. So being able to swap attacks in the middle of your routine only really matters if you're fighting multiple opponents that require you to hit them with different types of damage: bludgeoning for the skeleton, slashing for the zombie. I can see it happening once in a campaign, you know. And then there's specialty rules that say you can make 2 attacks per round following if the following conditions are met. You attack with the same method on the same foe, or you attack to the front with the mace and then slash to his side with the blade, or you attack at the front with the mace or the blade and then you attack with the spike directly behind you. And the conditionals on this are so intense that it feels like Pathfinder.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you can make 2 attacks with this. That's great. I'm already a weapon specialist. So if I'm 7th level, I get 2 attacks anyway. And if I'm a 13th level or higher fighter or gladiator, I'm getting 5 every 2. So this is a downgrade for me. So this is a weird weapon that definitely feels like it's trying very hard to be a combination of a bunch of stuff that does all sorts of things not terribly well, and it becomes kind of a muddled mess. The one thing that I will say for this is that in a setting like Dark Sun, where people are just going to take whatever they have at hand and try to find unusual ways to turn it into a killing tool, the appearance of something like this makes thematic sense. Someone would have made this in Dark Sun, and someone would have used it. Is that person your PC? Probably not, if they have an intelligence above 7.
If they have a choice. So
Yeah.
looking at it kind of answers my question. The polearm version, it says, was the original, but it was not long before enterprising weaponsmiths came up with smaller version for one-handed use. This weapon is a horseman's mace with a short curved blade on top of the head and a small spike at the other end. So there's a smaller one. It says it does less damage but can be wielded more quickly. But it doesn't give you any stats for it.
It does. There's a separate second set of stat lines. If you look at the block, it goes gladiator's friend, footman, cost,
Oh,
weight,
there
size,
it is right there.
and then cost, weight, size, yada
There
yada.
you go.
That one's medium size, speed factor 6, d6, d4, or d4, d4. So the trade-off is that you get to use it in one hand, but it does less damage, turns into like a short sword level weapon or dagger level weapon. In that format, like, I might actually use it with a shield or with an offhand weapon, because if you have the specialized use bonus, you can get the extra attacks out of it. But it's still just like, why not be a specialist in the short sword or the Sapara or the Impaler? So, I think that was like, there was formatting choices made here. Probably it should have just said Gladiator's Friend Horseman's right above the second stat block. But whatever the case, it's a little bit messy. And I think my original assessment stands. This is definitely like a tier B weapon, not the sort of thing that you're going to want to go all out on. There are better choices out there.
And the next one is called the Hamanu Staff. And it says this is most frequently used among the gladiators of Uruk, and it looks like a quarter-staff version of the staves of Hamanu scattered throughout Uruk's pit of Black Death arena. So, if I recall, the staves of Hamanu are basically like pillars with obsidian, all around them. So this is a staff version of that.
Right. So essentially, it is a quarterstaff with a bunch of obsidian spikes that are embedded all along it, except for two spots where you can put your hands. So imagine that you are Ray Park playing Darth Maul, and you are spinning this thing around like mad, whoa, 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 and there are only two places that you can grab because everything else is whirling death. Sounds like it looks very cool. And it kind of is. It's got D8 damage, so you're doing longsword damage. Speed factor 4, so it's faster than a longsword. It's large size, so you do have to use it in both hands. And oddly, it's type bludgeoning, even though they make a big deal about all of the spiky obsidian bits that are going to puncture you. Proficient use says you can use it as a regular quarterstaff, spinning it through a variety of maneuvers to parry enemy blows. What does this mean in game terms? Absolutely nothing! Yay! When you're a specialist, you can make 2 attacks a round, made against 2 different foes, one in front of you, one behind or to the side. So you get that sort of Ray Park action, but it's highly dependent upon you actually caring about battlefield positioning. So also runs into that problem that, like, if I'm already a specialist with this thing, once I hit 7th level or more, this is not doing me any favors. I can just make extra attacks as is. Unless you decide to do something really weird, like say this lets you use 1 attack to make 2 strikes, that it's getting really finicky in terms of like how you have to position your character and when they're allowed to do things and whatnot. So it seems like it was not thought out very well in terms of detail. But overall, not terrible as far as some of these weapons go. Its damage output is good. It's fast. It's expensive if you buy it made out of metal, but who's going to get it made out of metal? You're going to get it made out of wood with a bunch of obsidian chunks in it. If you are a low-level weapon specialist, getting 2 attacks every round when you are in a target-rich environment can be advantageous, especially considering how much damage you're putting out with it. So, Hamanu-like.
All right, moving on to the hawk hatchet. The picture looks like a hawk's face, which is like sharp, so that's the blade part, and then the back looks like wings that are pointedly sharp, so that is piercing. But it says the hawk hatchet, pictured on page 11 of the Complete Gladiator's Handbook, gets its name from the shape of the head. I checked out page 11, and the only thing I can see, there's a weapon that someone's holding that really looks like a pick with a blade on the other end. So that's, I guess that's pretty much what we got here. But the one that's drawn here looks much more like a hawk.
Yes. Yeah, and they mention in the text that the hawk hatchet always looks like it has 2 wings for the pick ends that are of different lengths. So if you look at the one in the Gladiator's Handbook, you're looking at one where the wings are outstretched to either side, and then you get the hawk head as sort of this rounded shape with a beak on the end. And then the version here has the 2 wings more in parallel with each other. So they're coming off the back of the hawk-like head. Hilariously, the artist put an eye onto the hawk head there. And it's designed to look like it's sharpened there, and that's in the description. This is another hybrid weapon. On one end, it's an axe. On the other end, it's a pick. So damage output, medium, D6 plus 1 for the axe head, D4 plus 1 for the wings, or without the plus 1 if you're fighting large size. Speed factor 5, piercing or slashing. So you can take your pick depending on what you need, depending on who you're fighting. But when you're proficient with it, you get an extra attack per round against someone behind you because you're slashing with the axe head in front, and then you backhand as you pull back to hit someone behind you. Again, really positionally sensitive, and I get the impression that the writer of this article was really thinking about, if I'm standing in a battlefield using this weapon, how am I going to wind up hitting people with it as I'm swinging it all around me?
Yeah.
One of the major advantages of the hawk hatchet is it is cheap. 2 gold pieces for a steel one. So that's like, if you're a starting fighter, 3rd level in 2nd edition Dark Sun, you have 5d4 times 30 for your starting gold, or starting ceramic, sorry. So on average, you're going to get like 300 ceramic out of that, 200 for a hawk hatchet. It is potentially within range of a starting character to have one of these made out of metal.
Isn't 2 gold? Isn't that like what a dagger costs in second edition?
Yeah. Yeah, and this is better than a dagger in terms of hand-to-hand combat if you're a fighter. And then if you're a specialist, you can make disarm attacks with it. It says it gives you a +2 to all attempts to use the disarm or expert disarm skill. I don't remember D&D having disarm or expert disarm skills.
Is that a skills and powers thing?
I think it's probably referring to disarm maneuvers in combat and tactics or something like that, but it's probably just poor word choice here. But overall, like, weapon damage mid, price very low, speed factor not bad. Bonus attack against someone behind you when you are just proficient with it. That is huge for people who are not fighters or gladiators, because if you are in a position where, like, you are getting surrounded, suddenly you're getting 2 attacks per round, like a fighter or gladiator might, just by using one of these things. So, heck, I could see like a cleric using a hawk hatchet, like an earth cleric who has a steel one and then a shield in their other hand, and then just gets right into the thick of things and was like chop, whack, and positioning themselves specifically to be in positions where they're getting 2 attacks per round with it. And then the specialized use gives you a bonus, a +2 on disarming. I mean, okay. I don't know that people do that much disarming in Dark Sun. It's not really swashbuckling that much, but why not? Lean into it. If you've already decided to be a specialist with this weapon, it's some gravy. So, I think that this is like, it's better than the Gladiator's Friend. Would I take it over an Impaler? Probably not, if I had the choice. But if this is going to be used as like a backup weapon, or if you have a character that you are just like, I want to do something that feels really unique and aesthetically distinct, this one's a winner.
All right, moving on, we've got the hook sword, which really, looks like a pirate weapon to me.
Yeah.
So it's a scimitar-like weapon with a cutting edge that juts out slightly on a hook-like curve from the main part of the blade. And because of the benefits it provides, it's mainly used by montaires, which are the chariot, right? The chariot riders?
Yeah, they're the mounted gladiators. This is a little annoying to me personally, because the hook sword, for me, refers specifically to a Chinese martial arts weapon. And this one is not that, but it has the same name. But whatevs. It's Dark Sun. We do what we want. Good damage, D8 +1, so better than a longsword on the base damage. D8 against large size. Speed factor 5, slashing weapon, medium size, so use it in one hand. 15 GP, 4 weight. It's almost identical to a longsword, except that it does more damage against medium creatures and less against large ones. The proficient use gives it an extra point of damage to everybody when you are attacking while mounted. So this is designed to be used the way that like a mounted scimitar or cavalry saber is. You do a draw cut as you drive by someone and you lop their head off. That's really nice, because if you're making mounted attacks anyway, just add some extra damage on top of your bonus for attacking from higher ground and maybe for charging. So, okay, sure, I'll take it. I don't know how many people do mounted combat in Dark Sun. I do have a character who's a fighter who rides a Crodlu, but it doesn't come up a lot. So,
yeah, I feel like a lot of these would be like you were talking about. Like if you had to use it, which is usually going to be in the arena. So I feel like a lot of these could be arena weapons.
Right, and then specialist, you get a +1 to disarm, the aforementioned disarm and expert disarm skill. Not entirely sure what they mean by skill. Again, skill issue, but +1 to disarm. Okay, this weapon is basically a longsword that is slightly worse if you are just on the ground, because it's not as good against large-sized creatures. It's better technically against medium-sized creatures, and it is somewhat better if you are mounted. So if you are playing a Montar or a character who is expecting to be mounted all the time, I might take this over the longsword.
Hmm.
Otherwise, probably not.
All right. The next weapon is the mandible sword. And this says it can only be made out of the mandible of a giant insect, such as a cank, soldier antloid, or a gage. Um,
Right. Going straight up against their earlier comment that everything in here is made of steel.
and I just think it's kind of funny because uh, why couldn't we have had this before? This is essentially a bone, um, a bone scimitar or a chitin scimitar.
Right. Um, and so in terms of theme, it fits perfectly into Dark Sun.
Mm-hmm.
Stat wise, it's fast, speed 4, piercing, which is interesting until you realize that like they have the illustration. It's got a blade, but it's a giant insect mandible, so it has these protrusions coming off of it. The same way that a mandible, like a man catcher, would normally latch onto someone so that
Mm-hmm.
the insect can grab them and eat them. So this is a single mandible, so it's got a curve with a bunch of these little pointy bits on the inside of the curve. So you whack somebody with it, and you're puncturing them with those pointy bits for the most part. Medium
Well,
size, so you use it in one hand.
this says the outer edge of the mandible is sharpened to serve as a
Right.
normal cutting edge. So I guess it should have
Yeah, you potentially
slashing.
you would have a slashing use there, but I can see the inner blade there is as being the piercing one.
Yeah, so
Notably
it says
cheap.
D8 for front edges, D8, D6 for front edges, or D6, D4 for back edge. So
Right.
yeah.
Um, excuse me there. Um, and then that becomes important when you use the with proficiency, because you can strike with the back edge for the lower damage if you're proficient with it. So that's one of the things they call out in the proficient use, is that the back edge is only usable as a slashing attack if you're proficient with it. Um, and there's a note to the effect that this does less damage, so it's used for arena combats where they want to drag the fighting out. So that's literally like, if you're proficient with this, you can use it less effectively so that you can make the crowds happier.
Right.
Okay, not really an adventurer's tool there. When you're specialized, you can go front and back, and once again, it's you hit someone in front of you, and then you hit someone that's either behind you or to the flank, using the outer blade for the first strike and the inner blade for the second. So another one of those like very situational positioning dependent. A lot of this positioning dependent stuff feels sort of like I can see this coming up if you're in like a 3-on-3 gladiator match.
Mm-hmm. Or just feel like he didn't. The author really didn't have other ideas of like what these weapons could do because
Entirely possible.
in second edition there wasn't a lot of this. You know, um, I think like what I could see being cool with it is you could use it as slashing, obviously, but since you don't have two of them, you're not really going to grab somebody, but you could push somebody. I feel like if you hit them with the back
Yeah,
edge
yeah,
and then push them, so like maybe you get a bonus to shove or something like that.
right. Yeah, I think you're right there. The other neat thing about this is that since it specifically is made from the mandible of a giant insect like a cank, soldier antler, or gage, this is the sort of thing that a character with crude weapon proficiency is going to make if they are out on the trail and they need to make a weapon, and they're
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, well, the cank just died in this combat. I'm going to rip this mandible off and then sharpen it up and put a handle on it and use it as a weapon.
There you go. All right, the next weapon is basically a tricol, but with another blade. So we have a
Right?
quad
Quad
plowshare.
walker. The quad call.
Exactly.
Well, the call is coming from inside the building on this one, with an unimpressive D6 or D8 damage and a speed factor of 9 for a two-handed weapon, large size, 20 pounds. Um, I don't know. Like, you can, when you're proficient, you can use it to make two attacks. So we're getting back to sort of the hawk hatchet thing here, where it's proficient instead of specialist to get two swings with it, as long as the second blow is struck to one of your flanks. Super positioning dependent. Um, and then when you're a specialist, your second blow can go straight behind you instead of to a flank. Um, but only if the rear opponent is large size or larger. because it's so awkward to use this thing. This thing, like, oh, it is like sub tier C. Why would you ever use this? The damage output is low, it is slow, it is heavy, it is expensive, it requires both of your hands, and it does one type of damage. And like you said, it's the tri-call, except worse.
Right. All right, let's move on to the Rim Club.
Yeah.
It's a new
Popular
improvised
nightclub.
weapon.
Yeah.
Again, used by
we'll be doing the drinks at the Rim Club next time.
Another Monterre kind of charioteer weapon. It is a 3 to 4 foot long fragment from the rim of a broken wagon wheel or chariot wheel, a heavy one, or weapon shaped that way when made by scratch by a craftsman. The price is for the latter. So it's basically a curved great club.
Right. Sometimes used for subdual. And the flavor is like, says mules, half giants, but those powerful enough to favor brute force weapons all use it. Only half giants can use it one-handed. Okay, that's a weird special call out. It's large size, so normally you have to use it in two hands, but half giants get to use it in one hand. Very peculiar property that normally doesn't get applied to the game. Does d6 damage. Where's the huge brute force that you were just talking about? Come on, man. 12 pounds, speed factor 10. It's huge advantages. It's incredibly cheap. 2 silver pieces. So it's 20 ceramic to get one of these things that's made out of metal, according to the rules that they set out, saying that everything in here is a default steel. So if you absolutely have to have a metal weapon, this is the cheapest you can get. You get +2 to damage if you are above your foe. Basically, whenever you get the height advantage, I would say on your attack roll, +1 to hit for height advantage. So like if you're mounted, if you're in a chariot, if you're on top of a wall, it suddenly goes from d6 to d6 +2, 3 to 8. Better than a longsword because it's got a higher low end on the range. So, okay. The only time personally that I would use this is on a half giant, so I can use it in one hand. And if I want to use this as a metal weapon, because I really want something made of metal. So I pay 20 ceramic. I get a 12-pound weapon that's large size, but I'm allowed to use it in one hand. It's bludgeoning. And if I have height advantage on someone, I do d6 +2 damage. And then specialized bonus. This is exciting. None. Okay. Yeah. This is better than, like, you can attack twice, but only if one opponent is in front of you, the other one is behind you, and you're wearing blue trousers and it's a Tuesday. But it's not terribly exciting in terms of stats. It has some nice flavor in that it usually comes from like a busted wagon wheel or something of the sort. I could totally see if you're running a gladiator-themed campaign, your half giant or whatever gets in a mismatched battle where they send a Montar against your team, you kill the Montar, and then you make this as a trophy weapon. And you're like, okay, we killed the Montar, I smashed his chariot, and I take the broken pieces of the wheel and have it shaped into this rim club for me. But as an adventuring weapon, like, yeah, unless you're a half giant who can use it in one hand, there are better things to do if you're going to use a two-handed weapon.
All right, the next weapon is the Spike Shield. It's a large circular shield with a wooden foundation covered with a layer of leather and festooned with sharp spikes. So that sounds cool. You know, like just a spiked shield.
Yeah. And the damage on this is crazy. D8 for small to medium, D6 for large, speed factor 6, piercing damage. But it's large size, so you have to carry it with both hands. You can like shield punch with it, or shield rush with it if you've got like kind of combat and tactics or complete gladiator or whatnot. But yeah, that feels a little weird. I was hoping for a round body shield that's got a spike coming off of it, and then I just smash some fool with that, and then I hit him with my impaler in my other hand. But nope, apparently I've got a tower shield that's got a big spike on it and a pair of handles, and I'm holding it with both handles and then smashing this thing into people. So a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
18 pounds, so not for the faint of strength. And it's, when you're proficient, you get a +2 to damage against any size M or smaller person that you knock off their feet with a shield rush attack. So the shield rush is like a specialized charge that appears in Complete Gladiator and Combat and Tactics, where you run at the guy and smash him with the shield in order to try and bowl him over. So that's sort of like you have to set it up. But it's not bad. You charge into combat with this thing in front. If you hit, you do your damage, but you roll to see if you knock them down. If they fail their save, they get knocked down, and then you get 2 more points of damage. Okay, that's not bad. And then when you are specialized, you can use it to parry, which means you can't make an attack of your own during that round. Which means what? How is this different from the parrying rule of the player's handbook? We don't know. It doesn't say.
Right there.
Why?
Let's see, somewhere. It says the shield rush tactic described on page 41 of the Complete Gladiator's Handbook. So I went to check it out. And so this is where like the disarm and the expert disarm come from. And so there's probably that shield rush or whatever here. There's a whole bunch of shield punch, shield rush. There we go. Yeah.
Right.
So,
and those also appear in Combat and Tactics. That's where I'm most familiar with them anyway.
Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of maneuvers and skills.
Okay, so that's what they mean by expert disarm and parry. So they have the specialized versions of these maneuvers in the combat chapter of Complete Gladiator.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right? So you got to look at a different book to get what you need.
That explains that. So would have been nice if all of them had the page reference, just like it says there. Shield rush tactic on page 41 of Complete Gladiator. But everywhere else, it's like you can use it to parry and attack effectively. Should have said, as seen on page 43 of the Complete Gladiator. All right, but at least we know. Now we know.
Now we know.
You only had to go 3/4 of the way through this podcast in order to find out.
All right. The last 2 weapons now are the Whistling Mace Footman's and the Whistling Mace Horseman's.
Right. Maces with hollowed out heads that have a pitted appearance, so the wind whistles through them, creating an eerie and unnerving sound made out of volcanic rock called hatic that is found only in Athos, which is porous like pumice, but as hard as obsidian. Has to be laboriously drilled by the craftsman, specially molded if it's made out of steel or iron. So I feel like somebody looked at the singing sticks and went, oh yeah? Well, what about the Footman's version? D6, D4 damage, so kind of like Mace Light. Horseman's version, D4 +1, D2 +1. Oh, you're killing me, Smalls. Speed factors at 6 or 5. They're both bludgeoning weapons, obviously medium size, so you can use them in one hand, 3 or 6 pounds, depending on which one you're getting. And 12 gold pieces for the Footman's version, 9 for the Horseman's version. What horse? So, yeah, kind of like a pocket mace that is not quite as good as your typical Footman's or Horseman's mace. The proficient bonus is that you get the eerie keening wail that forces opponents to make a morale check, and if they've never heard it before, it's at a -2 penalty. Okay, this is potentially huge. This is just with proficiency. So you run into 30 Gith with your group of 3rd level characters who are fresh out of the box. And your fighter happens to be proficient with this, or your gladiator happens to be proficient with this, or your thief happens to be proficient with this. Who knows? And you got one that's made out of bone because it's cheap. So you spin this thing around, and it makes it sound like a crate dragon. And now the Gith make a morale check at -2. And if they fail the morale check, they run away or surrender or make a fighting withdrawal. You can end combats with intelligent or semi-intelligent creatures this way. This is like working as designed in early AD&D, where there's specific breakpoints that cause creatures to check morale. Oh, you have killed half of their side. They're badly outnumbered and taking losses. You just used a spell that disabled a large number of opponents. You force a morale check, and if they fail, they might run away. But now you can just open the combat by going, yeah, I'm going to make all you fuckers run away, even before we get into the meat of fighting. So that's enormously powerful, depending on how your rolls go. Also depends on what you're fighting. Some creatures have so much morale that you can't get them to flee no matter what. And then expert use instead of specialist use. It says a specialist may make an extra attack with the weapon each round due to its lighter and handier nature compared to normal maces. Also potentially huge, but totally up to interpretation. Is this an extra attack on top of your improved attack rate from being a specialist? Not clear. So is it like, I'm a third level fighter and I'm a specialist with the whistling mace. I get 2 attacks per round. I get 3 every 2 because I'm a specialist. I get 5/2 because I'm a specialist and get a bonus attack from this bonus thing. Not really sure. Gonna have to talk to your DM about it. So this is a weapon that's like, on its face, the stats are subpar, not impressive. But these special abilities are potentially huge game changers. Like, can I have a 5/2 attack rate with this? And that's only for the fights where someone made their morale check because otherwise everyone runs away? That's a lot.
Yeah. All right, and that is the final weapon for this magazine, and this is the final weapon for for magazines in general. Now, the main the original box set, the revised box set, Gladiator's Handbook, and Thri-Kreen of Athos all have a ton of weapons. So
yeah,
there's so many weapons. I've always wanted to just take a sheet and just delete all the old weapons and just have pretty much Dark Sun weapons.
Yeah.
It's so hard. Like, people are just so used to oh, I want a spear, I want a short sword, I want whatever. If they have the choice, obviously.
Yeah. Oh, I can't believe we ate the whole thing. But this is definitely a thing where if you want to run just a pure Gladiator game, and they talk about this a little bit in the Complete Gladiator Handbook, but you could run a game set in Dark Sun that's done up like the Spartacus TV show, where everyone is a gladiator or a member of a gladiator's entourage or an employee of a house that sponsors a gladiator, and your whole game is about the arena battles and about all of the politics and the drama that surrounds it. You could totally do that. You could just say, these are the weapons that are permitted to gladiators in the arena, and here's your list, and it's just these oddballs. Choose wisely, sir.
So, yes, you could totally do that. And I've had the idea to do that. And the reason I'm laughing is because I did it one time in 4th edition. Yeah. And I said, yeah, everybody create 2 characters, right? Like, one that is, that is a gladiator of some sort. And then one that's more like somebody that's going to be involved in the house politics and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So everybody created their characters and we're together, they're all together. And the whole idea was you're going to be part of this house and, and gladiators and whatever. And literally the first session, they break out. I think there was only one session of that adventure, of that campaign. I was so annoyed. I was like, "What? Didn't we all agree to this?" They broke out. It was funny.
Wow.
All right. Well, I think that is going to wrap it up for us. Jesse, where can people find you online?
Yeah, you can find me at Blue Sky Social now as Jesse Heinig. And of course, I occasionally lurk around the Dark Sun Facebook group and in the Dark Sun Discord channel, desperately hoping to make it to Athos Con, and I should be popping in occasionally for the drinks at Watering Hole of Choice chats. And as for you?
Yeah, all those same places as well. I also started what is it called? Lemmy. So Lemmy is sort of like Mastodon. It's like a federated version of Reddit, essentially. So it's a ttrpg.network. And I made a Dark Sun group. So, there's only a couple of people have been posting in there. So not many, me and one other, I think. But if you don't like the idea of Reddit anymore, this is pretty much like Reddit, but it's federated, which means you can have, individual servers all connected to each other, more like Mastodon. And then, of course, if you want to play a game with me, you can find me on Start Playing. I recently started 2 Dark Sun games. I could definitely use some people in one of them, which is just like a City State of Tyr game. And the other one is Ashes of Athos, the 4E organized play converted to 5th edition. Characters started at first level and they are 4th level now, so still plenty of time.
If you've been having trouble finding a group for Dark Sun, this is your man right here. Go and get it.
All right, that's gonna wrap it up. Thanks, Jesse.
Oh, thank you so much, Robert. This was a ton of fun. See you all in the wastes.